Hi, this is Regina Y. Favors with Favors Financial Recovery. So the series topic is gap assessment and overcoming financial setback. And so we're going to talk about gap analysis. And I use this concept in many of the other series I do on romantic relationships, sort of urging individuals to really reflect on previous relationships and then conduct a gap assessment of their, thinking about relationship making. Well, I want to apply gap assessment to personal finances and for you to help you to determine where there are areas of misunderstanding about personal finances that are sort of keeping you in financial setback, because the goal is always to get out of financial setback into recovery. So gap assessment is something that we're going to discuss and apply to personal finances and financial preparation in this lecture. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for further videos if you are interested. This is Favors Financial Recovery, series topic, gap assessment and overcoming financial setback. Thank you for visiting the channel. This lecture is subject to fair use. So here are your learning objectives. By the end of this lecture, students will be able to do the following: define gap assessment, apply gap assessment to your current financial setback, design a plan that considers gap assessment in your financial recovery. So you want to definitely understand the concept of gap assessment, what it actually means, not think too much to the left or to the right, but really get to the center of the problem when you are conducting a gap assessment concerning your personal finances. You want to also apply the concept to your current financial setback. So as you are looking at your income to debt ratio, what's going on there? Is it that you just don't have enough income, or is it that you have too much debt, or that you are spending too much, or you're not managing what you have? And that's something that you want to think about. And then of course you will always design a plan that considers gap assessment in your financial recovery. You just don't want to say, I want to be financially whole, I want to be financially well, I want to be rid of all this debt. If you don't get a good understanding of your gaps, and gap assessment is always based upon your knowledge base. What is missing in your knowledge base? What's that gap? So define gap assessment, apply gap assessment to your current financial setback, design a plan that considers gap assessment in your financial recovery. The mission of Favors Financial Recovery is to offer psychology concepts and approaches to educate and encourage individuals to overcome financial setbacks. So psychology, you will always have access to information online and through various self-help books about working with your personal finances. I usually visit and watch a lot of Dave Ramsey's videos and Susie Orman's videos as well on personal finance. But I think sometimes those authors and self-help gurus are missing some base concepts, especially specific to psychology and especially specific to behavior and why we do the things that we do. So I think using psychology concepts and approaches to help you understand and overcome financial setback is a very useful tool. So the core values for Favors Financial Recovery are personal responsibility, growth mindset, mastery orientation, ethical dealings, integrity, and recovery. Personal responsibility is what you normally take after you have left your main house, right? So I feel like parents are responsible for us, and yes, there are consequences to any actions that we do. All the way leading up to 18 years old. But once you leave the house, you are 100% responsible for yourself, and you need to make adult-based decisions with the understanding that you are 100% personally responsible for yourself. Growth mindset is connected to Carol Dweck and her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, where she makes a distinction between fixed mindset and growth mindset. And fixed mindset is basically reflected in an individual who doesn't accept challenges. They have a certain mentality that doesn't allow for them to grow beyond failure. They won't even entertain a risk because of the idea that they might fail at it. Versus growth mindset is a person who is reflected in a person who will embrace challenges, understand that failure is not the end goal and it's not the end all be all to their existence, but will learn what they need to learn, accepting constructive criticism to move them forward. Mastery orientation is something that I use, and it refers to goal orientation theory. And there's a difference between learning goal orientation and performance goal orientation. Learning goal orientation, you believe abilities are not fixed and that they can be developed over time. And you feel like learning is important for learning's sake. And that speaks to growth mindset as well. Performance goal orientation is the type of person who wants to look smart in every situation. You think abilities are fixed and cannot be developed, and that sort of speaks to fixed mindset. Ethical dealings is something that I usually refer to when it comes to our relationships that we have with credit cards, and specifically when we are experiencing a downtime in life, a setback of some sort, financial setback, and you have lost your job, and you say to yourself, well, these credit card companies just have to wait. I got to pay my rent. The thing about ethical dealings is that you are still responsible for that credit card, regardless of whether or not you are experiencing a downtime. And that is true. When I am experiencing a downtime, I'm going to prioritize shelter costs, prioritize electric costs, food costs, things like that. And whatever I can do with the credit card companies, I'm going to do by credit card or by month. But in thinking about just previous lessons that I did not learn concerning credit card companies, that if you shouldn't get more than what you can pay at the end of each month. And if you can only manage one or two, manage one or two, and that you should already have money set aside to meet that card, that one or two or three cards. If you don't already have that money set aside, there's no sense in engaging the credit card market until you are financially able to do so. And I think you should set a major goal to building and sustaining good credit score, etc. Not necessarily using the credit card just to spend. Integrity speaks to character, as it always does, and how you conduct yourself personally, professionally, academically, wherever you are socially, is very important. So having integrity about yourself, that's why I say it's important that you do right by credit cards, because they can have a negative impact on you later, especially with taxes. It could affect your character. If a company is having to submit to an IRS request for wage garnishment, okay, that's going to sort of affect your relationship with your company, because companies hire you based on character as well. And then recovery is the end goal. You want to recover. That is a goal that you want to set. There are other goals that come after recovery, and it's something that I'm considering, but definitely you want to recover. And recover is to think about whatever bad thinking you had towards personal finances, and do your best to get a better understanding so you can recover and sustain recovery financially. So these are the core values. So conducting a gap assessment, need for financial preparation. Financial preparation. Financial preparation involves understanding where there are gaps in your understanding. These include the following. So finances and debt reduction, shelter and stability, work and savings plan, education and skill development, emotional self-regulation and temperament, and you should know your own gaps. We don't get enough financial preparation. I think parents mean well when they give us allowances or they connect chore work to money. I think they mean well, but they don't really sit down with pen and paper to teach us how to financially prepare. Even if you are 16 years old and you are working at a fast food restaurant after high school, after your classes for the day, whether it's during the week or on the weekend, there's still enough money to sit down with the child, with the high schooler, and sit down and just help the child understand what responsibility should accompany handling of money, right? That it's not that, yes, you are working, you are trading work to get money, right? For hours to get money, but it should go beyond that, where there should be a dinner table conversation with the family. John makes a certain amount of money. John is going to contribute a certain amount of money to the household, just to teach John that the idea that wherever you go, you always have to pay something. It's not like John has to pay rent at 16 years old, but taking something from John, $40 every paycheck, just to get him an understanding that money goes out. You not only did you receive money coming in for work, but money also goes out. Whereas if you just left John to his devices and he worked and made money and then just spent the money without direction, he would get into more of that habit than actually thinking about the purpose of money. And so I think we don't always get what we need when we are young. We get what we need as much as humanly possible, but I think that we need more financial preparation. So finances permeate all areas that you see here that are bullet pointed. So finances and debt reduction. How are you going to use your finances to reduce your debt? And how do you increase your debt based upon your finances? Meaning that you think just because you got a raise, you can now go and buy a bigger house. Sometimes it's better to keep that house, even if you got a raise, and then look and reassess all of your commitments, your debt commitments, cut them down, and then decide to buy the house. And so finances do help to support your living, but you want to be careful. I noticed that a lot of people, when they do get raises, they immediately go spend more money. They go get a new car. They may not always go get a new house, but they definitely go get a new car. And so that's something you want to think about, because if your house is working for you, the current house you have is working for you, stay in that for another 2 years and then plan and prepare and plan your exit from that house to the next house. Shelter and stability. We do not have a good understanding really of shelter and stability when it comes to us being 100% responsible for ourselves. Because if you are giving part of your rent away to somebody else, and that means that you might have paid your rent, but then you might have an extra amount in the bank that you're saving that is the equivalent of your rent, and someone comes along and says, I need $200, and you take $200 from that particular extra amount, you don't have an understanding about shelter and stability. Your rent is $900 and you have $900 extra in the bank. That does not mean that $900 is available for someone else. It just means that if something happens with your job and you lose hours on your job, you still have your rent. So we need to have a very good understanding of shelter and stability, that you need to cover yourself first. It is not selfish to cover yourself first. And also you should be selfish to cover yourself first, because you are 100% responsible for yourself. So work and savings plan, which we also don't do. It helps when you set it up with HR, benefits enrollment manager, coordinator person, that you want to take a certain amount of money to go to a thrift savings plan or any type of retirement or something like that. And sometimes you can have a certain amount of money to go to I don't know, some kind of investment product from your paycheck. Okay, then that's easier because then you don't always have to think about it. You just have to work. Because sometimes if I have to take it out personally and go and send it into the particular retirement plan, I don't think I'm going to do it. So it helps when it's already worked out on your behalf. But when we have work and savings plans should go together. They should come together like they are married. And a lot of times we separate work and then we separate savings plan as if they are two different entities, but as if they don't have nothing to do with each other. And when you look at work and savings plan, you want to look at it in terms of the two being married. That when I work, I also need to save. And if I want to continue to save, I need to continue to work, right? And so work and savings plan. Education and skill development is something that you always have to consider. I've said this in a couple of audio lectures that when I graduated with my master's of English into an industry that was newly becoming social media sensitive and heavy, that I only prepared to teach English. I did not necessarily prepare to go into the business arena. I assumed that I was going to get a BA, MA, PhD in English, and then teach at the university level. Well, by the time I graduated with my master's degree, I was really kind of burnt out because I never had any real rest from educating myself. And when I went through issues with the recession and I lost my job, became homeless, etc. And when I was trying to get another job in the business sector, because I couldn't get back on with my district because they had budget shortfalls and they kind of laid you off, and the financial recession just really hit big. And when I was trying to get into the business sector, I realized I didn't necessarily have those skills anymore. I had them prior to college, but once I went to college, they kind of substituted or replaced those skills because I was so busy in college trying to dedicate all of my efforts to building my understanding for teaching English. So then what that says is even if I'm qualified for a job, I may not necessarily be competitive for the job. That somebody else could say for instance, someone else had an English degree as well, but then they married it with technology, a certificate in technology, whatever kind of technology it is. Well, that makes that person much more competitive. And that's something that I realized, that even though I'm qualified for a job, I may not necessarily be competitive. So conducting a sort of gap assessment of your current education and skill development when you are looking at the current industry requirements, workplace requirements, which will always require some kind of technology now, but also understanding that social media allows for companies to brand. And so you need to be aware of those types of concepts, right? And so that's what I realized in my sort of thinking, that I thought I had it all together with the degree itself, but I was missing some skill development as well. And so then when you are missing skill development, you're going to have to tap into your finances, maybe have to take additional courses, right, in technology, no less, and sort of bring your skills up to date with the current requirements and expectations of your industry. So that's going to take some time. You're definitely going to have to stay on your current job, make sure that cash flow continues to come in so that you can use a percentage of that cash flow towards updating your skills. And then emotional self-regulation and temperament is one of those things where we often give out of emotions. Someone has come to us about some money and they are putting us on the spot, or they are pressuring us and we don't want to make them mad. We want to people please or something like that. Well, that affects your finances, because if you are saying, I'm going to keep this certain amount of money to myself, and then you tell somebody the kind of money you have, immediately they go into this idea, how can I get her money to fund my lifestyle? They may not use those words, they may not use that sentence, but it's really what they're trying to do. Because if they have a job and they can meet their expenses, why do they need your extra $200? Girl, I can do this, I can do that. No, that's not what that is. You just don't want me to have the $200, and you want the $200 for yourself to do nothing with. They don't really need to do anything. They don't even need your $200. They just don't want you to have it. And so that's a very important thing, because emotional self-regulation and temperament, sometimes you give money to get the person out of your face. But then that person begins to use you again, and then it becomes a habit, and you find yourself giving money to get that person out of your face. So that's something that you want to think about too. So you should know your own gaps, and that's going to take some time to think about that while you are financially preparing for whatever next level that you are going to enter. So I have a scripture here that I think is useful and help you to understand. Luke 14:28-30, count the cost. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it, lest happily, after he had laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Now, counting the cost can apply literally to, say, a person trying to build a house, right? You need to understand how to lay the foundation, but if you are laying a foundation, there is the expectation that you're going to build on top of the foundation. So what happens when a person has not calculated the cost for not only laying the foundation but building on top of it? And you have to build all 4 walls, right? You have to have the money and funding to take care of all of the elements of building a house, right? And laying the foundation takes time. It's going to take man hours, it's going to take labor hours. Okay, it's its own worry just by itself. So if you get the visual of a contractor laying a foundation and then building on top of it, what happens then if he doesn't have enough funding to put up the third wall? Or what happens when he doesn't have enough funding to put the roof on the house? Or what happens if he doesn't have enough funding for all of the electrical or all of the city ordinance requirements that are connected to building on top of a foundation? And so he did all of that. He said he wanted a house, and then he decided to lay a foundation, but he don't have enough. He doesn't have sufficient to finish the task. And when you look at having sufficient to finish it, that means you set the goal to complete. And if you did not count the cost to determine if you had enough to complete it, that means you did not do your due diligence. So that's a good visual, a contractor having to build on top of a foundation. Well, your life, if you go back and look at me, even though I'm qualified to teach at the community college level, and my degrees are support that goal, if I decided to leave the community college environment, higher education environment, and move into business, I would have to add to my knowledge base, and I would have to have a record of education to my knowledge base, right? I don't necessarily have to go get a whole nother college degree, an associate's degree, a certificate in a particular area of the business or something like that would suffice. And so I would have to take into consideration, I would have to count the cost of moving between industries, moving from one industry to the next, right? If you're looking at this, here it is, you're trying to buy yourself a house, and you know that you need X amount of funds in order to get that done to accomplish that goal. And then you are able to get the house. But then you get into the house and you realize that there are more costs associated with having a house and maintaining a house, and that you didn't have the savings necessary to cover those costs. And now you have to go get a loan, or now you have to ask someone for some money to cover just basic costs that you should have already saved. It can be anything. It can be anything. It can be something breaks down or something like that. Because remember, when you were in an apartment, you could call the maintenance man. All of the maintenance costs were incorporated into your rental lease agreement, so you didn't have to worry about that. But if you would have waited a little bit and really understood what the cost, attended a home buyer's orientation about how to buy a home, that orientation would have provided you with documentation, with information about what is required, down payment, everything, all types of saving costs, homeowners association costs, things like that, and you wouldn't be so shocked. Property taxes, things like that. You would have had some kind of list to work with, and then you could compare the list, what everything is required per month, including your mortgage, with what you are making. That's why it's interesting how people who became victims of the subprime mortgage fiasco still are not completely 100% victims, even if the banking industry pushed a subprime loan. The person still did not have a sufficient credit score to be considered for another type of loan. Now, there are some shady dealings behind closed doors, and even if you had a high score or just a good minimum average score, it's possible that a subprime loan still would have been pushed on you, because the subprime lending was linked to the investment banking. And so the more that they got those subprime loans, the more that they could sell them on the open market. And so then that netted many people, many investors, a lot of money. So there were some shady dealings. But if you look at yourself as 100% responsible for you, and you look at the fact that you are not making the kind of money every year to buy a $250,000 home, or $300,000, or $400,000, or $500,000. You make $25,000 a year, and you think you could pay for that home, that type of home. And that's something that you can think about. We act hastily because we really do want to get in a home. We want to provide a home for our families, and we want to just kind of do better in life. We don't want to live in an apartment forever. But then you also have to understand there could be a gap in your understanding about something, that some people are not really built for homes. Some people are built for apartments or townhomes or condos. They don't want the individual personal responsibility of having to maintain a home, and they don't make enough to hire a gardener, a mow man, or anybody else. They don't have the same type of money that middle class or upper middle class people, or rich people for sure, would have. They don't have the money for a nanny. They don't have the money for a housekeeper, any other types of person that maintains the home for the homeowner. And so that's something you want to think about. Relationships also, it doesn't make any sense to get into a relationship and find out that your man is cheating or your woman is cheating. They were cheating prior to the marriage. And if you count the cost and really think about, if he's cheating prior to the marriage, what in the world is he going to do when we actually get married? That's counting the cost, because having sufficient to finish it is suggesting that you can finish this marriage. But bringing in cheating and infidelity is going to hinder that goal completion. It's going to hinder any type of goal completion. That's why you have people who mock relationships, romantic relationships, because didn't she know her man was cheating prior to them getting married? We always do that. We always say that we're happy for them when they get married. We're kind of suspicious when they decide to get married. And then we look at the wedding pictures and we're kind of, oh, that's so sweet. That's nice. Okay, maybe they do belong together. And then some news reporting comes out, some media reporting comes out that they've been cheating, the person has been cheating. And immediately we get on the sarcastic, cynical, mocking bandwagon. Didn't she know that he was already like that? I mean, she married him. I can't believe he married her. She was for the streets. She was always like that. He decided to marry her. Right? So we begin to mock him. And so you should marry some person who is cheating on you prior to the marriage, because you're not going to be able to finish out your marriage. You're not going to be able to lay the proper foundation, which will allow you to finish it out. Personal finances, any sort of things, anything that we get into, anything that we're choosing that's going to require some kind of finances, is important for us to sit down and think about, do we have enough to sufficiently fulfill the expectations and demands of this particular thing. You have a lot of people during the time when they were sending out stimulus checks were taking that stimulus check and buying tennis shoes and buying things that they just honestly really don't need. And that's not for me to necessarily say, but we are in a pandemic where the jobs are shut down. This was in 2020, the whole sort of year after, the whole time after March 2020, and things were shutting down. People couldn't get hours on the jobs. They were losing jobs. Some jobs would not be remote. And so the stimulus, when I made a Facebook comment that with that stimulus check, you should pay your rent up, because you don't know how things are going to turn. And then here, lo and behold, we are having rental problems. People are landlords are threatening to evict people, things like that. It would have been better to pay the rent, because then you can use later whatever money. You don't need tennis shoes during a pandemic. You can't go anywhere, right? So that's something that you want to think about. So for which of you intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it, lest happily after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it began to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. So that's something that I want you to think about. So what is a gap assessment? A gap assessment, or in industry terms, gap analysis, is a technique business leaders use to determine the steps needed to move from a current state to a desired state. A gap analysis includes the following steps: listing characteristics of the present situation, so those attributes, competencies, performance; listing characteristics needed to achieve a future situation, that is your what should be; highlighting gaps that exist and that need to be filled. It is the difference between what is and what should be. So if you are a person who filed for bankruptcy during this pandemic, that is your what is. Now it's going to take you 7 to 10 years to get to what should be, because once you file for bankruptcy, that is on your record, on your credit report. And so now you're going to have to rebuild financially. And that means you may have to take an extra job in order to reduce whatever debt that still is required to be paid even after bankruptcy, because some debt can be erased, but then there's some debt that you still have to pay. I know for certain that you have to pay student loans, right? So your what is that you are financially broken. You are financially strapped. You are financially down. You are in a financial setback. You are financially sick. And what should be is you want to become financially well. So that's going to require you to think about those core values I went over, and then also think about what made you sick in the first place. How are you going to recover? How is it? What are the tips and tools? You're definitely going to have to add to your knowledge base, because there's something missing if you are in a financial setback. There's some instruction that you missed. There is some direction that you failed to take. There is some honor that you did not give someone who was older than you, and that person was trying to tell you something, and you said, I don't need to listen to that person, right? And so therefore, the consequences of refusing to adhere or listen to someone when they have already walked out your steps, the consequences of that is showing up in your finances, because it's always in the finances. Just like everything is always in the mind, it's always in finances somewhere. So what is you are financially broken, and you are financially sick, and you want to become financially you want to become financially recovered, and then financially well. Financial wellness is something that's going to take longer. It's not something that you can achieve overnight. And so financial wellness is just financially well in all areas of your life. It's wellness in all areas of your life. And finances permeate all areas of your life. So you can do well with paying your rent but still have problems paying your debt. You can do well with paying your rent and paying your debt but still give in to the whims of people who want your money. You still shouldn't be a person that is turned around by someone pouting, trying to get at your money. So this is something that I want you to think about. It is the difference between what is and what should be. So you want to look at your present situation, what's going on, your attributes, your competencies, your performance. I was listening to a Dave Ramsey YouTube discussion, and the caller was talking about how much they owe and other things. And Dave Ramsey sort of said something that should be obvious to all of us, but it wasn't. And it isn't always. That he said to the caller, she had an income problem. That's the real problem. She's not making enough income in order to tackle that debt. And so I thought that was very interesting, because she's at the poverty line trying to live off whatever it is that she was living off, but she's not bringing in enough income. So work performance, really, that's what that actually means, work performance. And then competencies, of course, if you are not as competitive, if you lack certain knowledge of your industry and need to increase in knowledge. Some companies now offer professional development coursework that's free and that you could take, and that might help you to move around in the company and the organization, right? And then of course, listing characteristics needed to achieve a future situation. That's your what should be. Then highlighting any gaps that's between what is and what should be. So current position, where are you today? Financially, economically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, skill development. So financially, referring to whether your debt outweighs your income. Now, I've heard many financial gurus and professionals, licensed, certified professionals say that there is a such thing as good debt. A house is good debt. Student loans are good debt. But if you have $200,000 worth of student loans and you are only making $25,000 a year, we got a problem somewhere. How are you going to get that debt down, right? And then you have a family, you have kids, you have other shelter costs that you have to consider. So we really do need to look at our debt and see how much, by percentage wise, it outweighs our income. Economically, referring to status and poverty level, or little above poverty or thriving. So if your debt still outweighs your income, in some cases, based upon certain economic models conducted through the bank, you may not necessarily be considered poor or at the poverty level. But there is a cutoff point for reaching the poverty level or going over it for a single person, for a family of two, a family of four, etc. And so economically, you want to be sure that you are making the kind of money that moves you between levels. Sometimes people get confused when they win lotteries or when they make it big and make a whole lot of money, that they are not poor anymore. Well, you can still have a poor mentality, a poverty mentality. You can have millions of dollars in the bank and still spend like you are a poor person. And so sometimes we do this to increase our status, our social status, but all it does is exacerbates the current issues that you are having within yourself, right? Feeling guilty about having the money and spending it to get rid of it, right? I heard actress say that. I forgot her name right now. Emotionally, referring to mood regulation and whether you know how to handle conflict. If you are a moody person, you're going to use your money to make yourself happy. Sometimes that money pays for food. Sometimes that money pays to go to the club. Sometimes that money pays to do something else. Whatever the something else is, you don't know how to manage your moods. And you use your money as a solution to solve your mood issue. And money is, unless you are using that money to engage with a therapist, your mood is not going to be resolved. And so you're going to see more conflict in your life, and which will undoubtedly affect your money. Psychologically, referring to stress management and whether you have taken on too much. So sometimes you can make too much money, because making too much money requires you to be at your job 60, 80 hours a week. And so then you never enjoy your money. You never enjoy the effects of your money, and then it just basically adds to stress. Keeps you in the bed. You're too tired. I've always heard someone say, "Here it is. You got this big house. You can't pay for it because you are spending. I mean, you paid for it, but you don't spend that much time in it because you're always working. You're always working, and so you don't want that either. I think you should have a balance. I think you should have a house that you like, that you think is comfortable for you, and that you can manage, financially, reach for whatever you want to reach, but don't put so much on your back to the point that you can't manage it either. Spiritually, referring to your understanding about sex in marriage and sex out of marriage. And so you are using money with sex in marriage, and I put that there because I am a Christian. It may or may not apply to you, but it's something to think about, because we give a whole lot more when we are engaging in sex out of marriage than in marriage. We don't spend everything trying to get people through dating, all the money in our hearts, and then by the time we get to marriage, we don't want to spend anything at all. But if you have a good, healthy plan, dating with your finances plan, you'll see that you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on a date all the time to impress. Any woman who wants you to impress her in terms of financially is really just not a good tactic, because it's not a good strategy today. Their situation could change. She may have just as many options as you do, and you may have just as many options as she does. And here you are both spending a whole bunch of money on each other, or you spending more money on her because you feel like she's a preference, but none of you has really thought about the future, about you coming together in relationship where money is required. I never really agree with a big wedding, the first wedding. I think that you should have a civil ceremony, some little church house wedding or something like that. Do a buffet where everyone can be kind of comfortable, and then your 5 years or your 10 years you can have a bigger wedding. But here it is, you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a wedding, and you are entering a marriage, that hundreds of thousands of dollars could go towards the marriage. You got to fund the house. You got to put furniture in the house. You still got to pay bills. You got to merge your bills together. And so I wouldn't, it's just not a good idea today to spend that kind of money. Now, if you have money, that's completely different, right? But I don't know. I think the wedding should not be something that is so over the top. And I notice that people do those over the top weddings and they don't even stay with each other 2 years into the marriage. So that's just my spiel about that. And then skill development, referring to whether it is time for you to begin upgrading skills or developing a skill to move you forward. And this is the thing I think about the person who makes $25,000 a year, and they've been making it for 25 years. I mean, for 5 years, 25,000 for 5 years. I mean, it's stable. It's stable income. But if you want to move yourself forward, you are going to have to upgrade skills, add to your knowledge base. So that's going to require some kind of skill development. It's not always easy to make those decisions, but that is a financial decision that you will need to make if you want to move out of the $25,000 a year range. And so these are some of the current positions. Where are you today that you want to think about? Future position, where should you be? There are some things you know, there are some things you don't know. But not everyone is patient with what you don't know. What are your plans? What is your vision? What is your purpose? To where do you want to take yourself? So when I hit my own financial setback, life setback really, because I lost my job in California, no fault of my own, because it was beginning time for the financial recession. And then I moved back to Dallas, and I was able to find a teaching job, and I was on there a good year. And then in 2008, when the financial crisis really hit, I lost my job again. And it was essentially, I was an adjunct instructor, and full-time faculty members have rights under their contract. So if they're missing classes to meet the totality of their contract, which they are required to teach 5 classes to be full-time, and if I have a class and I'm an adjunct, they have every right to take my class. And that's essentially what happened. But then that left me without work during a recession. So I basically had to scramble to try to find a job. And that's what I said, that when I was trying to go into the business sector, I realized I was not competitive. And so then that caused me to think about where I am in terms of my educational background, my work experience, and where I need to go. But when I had to move in with family, it was just a very sort of strained, hostile, stress-ridden environment, because people oftentimes, especially family members, can't understand why you don't have a job and you have 2 degrees. And they don't consider the current circumstances that's going on with the financial recession. And now we have a pandemic. So think about if you were in someone's house and they said, I don't understand why you don't have a job when all the jobs are shut down, right? So not everyone is patient with what you don't know, meaning that even if I didn't have the job, I should have had some kind of other knowledge base about my situation. And I just didn't. I just understood that I didn't have a job and I needed to find a job. That's it. That was the extent of my knowledge base. And I also realized that I wasn't as competitive as I thought I was. So that's why I urge my students now to consider where they are now and where they want to take themselves, and I also encourage them to look at job announcements. And if a company is asking for XYZ now, in 2021, if they're asking for X amount of things now, what do you think they're going to be asking for 4 years from now? So the job announcement gives you some insight into how to prepare your current academic planning objectives, right? So I needed a plan to take me out of my current life setback. So I'm just going to bring it all up under that larger umbrella of life setback, which includes finances. So I started to create some products, not tangible products in terms of what people could understand, that were not enough. Well, they were tangible. I did create a book, but it wasn't commercial enough to be effective. So I realized it was going to have to take much more time. But I also decided to create a handbook. I also created other types of things that sort of put me in the mind of planning and vision and purpose. And I wouldn't necessarily say I knew where I wanted to take myself. I would just say that I was planning towards something. But when you are dealing with family members or impatient people or some people who just don't understand why you don't have what you have at the age you are at, they're not as patient with what you don't know, right? Because after all, they still have their jobs. They still have a place to live because you are living in their place. And it's just a struggle. So I ended up having to go into different shelters because of, dealing with family members and their impatience. But when I look back on that and have to take 100% responsibility for my decision making when I was in my 20s, it's obvious then the consequences would be that I would lose my job. I would have to go into a homeless shelter, live with family, etc. Because if you don't plan in your 20s, then you're going to see the effects of lack of planning in your 30s and your 40s, and preferably in your 40s when you really, really care, because you feel your mortality in your 40s. You are invincible in your 20s. You get some kind of sense about things in your 30s, but in your 40s is when you feel like you could actually die. You are surprised that you didn't know that. And maybe that's what the person is impatient about, that why didn't you know that you needed a savings? Why didn't you know that you needed money put aside just for something that happens? Anything could happen. And the irony is the people who are criticizing you are the people who went through exactly the same thing and didn't have a clue. But now that they are so far removed from the situation, their previous situation, they have the clue that they should have had. Then why don't they share that with you? Because it's just not their responsibility. They don't take it upon themselves as a responsible individual to say, I went through the exact same thing. Here's what I did. All they say is go get a job. Okay. And you can't stay here if you don't have a job, things like that. So not everyone is patient with what you don't know, that some things are definitely there for the taking for you to understand. But if you choose not to take it as an understanding, then you're going to be left with a lack of understanding once you get to another place that requires an understanding, right? That understanding that money, that you need to save some money, save a little bit out of every paycheck, would have helped me later when I needed it in the future, right? But if I refused to accept that understanding, then I'm just going to continue to spill over that bad habit forming, kind of like a domino effect. And then I'm going to be somewhere without that lack of understanding. And so whenever there's an opportunity to understand something and learn something, it's better to take that opportunity. I used to be a procrastinator in terms of academics. I would wait to the very last minute to do things. And then when the paper was due, I would cry the previous night and talk about why I waited too long and I should have done this earlier and things like that. I need to stop this. This is just wrong. And then I finish the paper and I feel all good about myself. And what I realized much later when I was teaching, that whatever you do the night before is not quality work. Okay. Well, procrastinating and saving money and not having it when you need it, and and then trying to make life work when you get to another level is not quality work. It's not going to be quality work because you are missing an understanding. You're missing your learning progress as well. That procrastination is essentially hindering your learning process. So that's why I want you to think about this, because not everyone is patient with what you don't know. They're just not. Even if the pandemic is no fault of your own, or the financial recession was no fault of your own, people expect that as a 100% responsible adult, you should have savings, period. You should have something in the bank. You shouldn't always have to come and ask somebody for something. All that money you used to ask people for money, and all of a sudden you don't have the money that you really need because you are down. So just remember that not everyone is patient with what you don't know. Overcoming financial setback, what should you do? Your first goal for determining gaps in your knowledge base is to journal. That allows you to self-reflect. Journal what is, where you are today. Journal what should be, where you should be at minimum. Journal a plan for how you will close gaps between what is and what should be. So in my situation, when I was getting out of my setback in April 2013, and then I returned to teaching in May 2013, and officially in that fall semester, I said I need to pursue financial stability. That means when I get on any job, I need to stay on that job. I don't need to job hop. And I've never been a person who job hopped, but I don't need to job hop. I honestly just need to keep my head down so I don't create any situation where I have to be fired or something like that. I don't need to make waves. I don't need to create any type of chaos. I'm definitely not going to take any of my employees home with me because I don't want to have issues with HR. And so my plan was from April 2013 that I'm going to pursue financial stability, and I stayed on that job for 8 years. I recently resigned because my life is going in a different direction in terms of creating these teaching videos. And that's what I did. And I didn't create any issues. I didn't get fired. I didn't do anything like that. And so that was the plan that I had, because the what is was a lack of financial stability. The what should be was I needed to be financially stable, and I achieved that goal. So now I'm thinking about a new goal for my business, which is to build financial capital for what I need to do. And I learned that was a very important goal when I failed with a government contract. And I took a government contract, not having the capital, but I was going to use the purchase order to pursue a capital through a bank. And I couldn't get it with the bank because I didn't have any assets. And I didn't have a record of using credit, because I had been out of the credit market for so long. I didn't want credit cards anymore, so I didn't have a record of it. And so I ended up going to an accounts payable lender. And so that lender gave me a percentage of the project, which meant that I wasn't going to be able to fulfill the whole project. So then I had to let the government contract go. I failed at it, and I cried. And I had to repay the loan, which I'm still in process of doing. And what I realized, what I learned, so was I didn't have the assets. I lacked the assets, the financial assets, the financial records of successes, financial records of credit or whatever. And what should be that I learned that what I should do is have 3 times the capital in the bank. So if the contract is $5,000, I need to have 3 times that in the bank. so that I'm not scrambling trying to find more loan money or trying to find more investors or trying to find um, anything to try to meet that contract, that I should never have um, received or accepted that contract without capital. It doesn't matter that I could have gotten a loan. It doesn't matter. I should not have accepted that contract without capital already in the bank. And that's what should be. So because I want to go on ahead and commercialize a lot of the audio lessons that I'm doing, and I want to create package instruction, what should be my process now is to build capital, build commercial capital. So what I'm going to do is likely sell some of the scripts that I have written on my own and start to build from there. So what should you do where you are today and really be honest about it? It's going to make you cry. I promise you, it's going to make you grieve. Even the person who's making $100,000 a year or any type of 5 figures, 6 figures or whatever. The pandemic forced them to really look at where they are today. As much as they are not responsible for the pandemic, but it just revealed a lot of what's going on and what you don't know. And then now, where should you be? So some people are going to be evicted because they couldn't pay their rent during the pandemic. So so wherever they are today, they are an evicted person, and that is on the court records, public records. That's not going off anytime soon. So then where should be is I got to get stable housing. Of course, you need to get a job. That's obvious, but I got to maintain stable housing, right? So I'm not kicked out again. So this is something that I think is very important that you should take the time to do when you are overcoming financial setback. Determining gaps in your knowledge base, journaling where you are today, journaling where you should be at minimum, and journaling a plan for how you will close gaps between what is and what should be. All right, hopefully you were able to gain some insight from this series topic. Like, subscribe, and visit. Like the video, hit the notification bell for future videos. You can visit my website, which is still in development, reginayfavors.com. You can always email me with a question, reginayfavors@yahoo.com. You will be able to purchase the book by the end of October 2021. I'm hoping that I will have it completed, completely revised rather. It is already written and done. I just have to edit it. It is Overcoming Setback, 5 Keys for Entering and Exiting Correction. Thank you for visiting the channel. Coming soon is my new book that I am working on presently and hope to complete by the end of the year, December 2021, preferably February 2022, and that is Favors, Financial Recovery, Psychological Approaches to Overcoming Financial Setback with some workbook elements. So it is it will be the book that will support the audio series, although I have developed the audio series prior to actually writing the book. So be on the lookout for this new book. When it comes out, when I finish, I will create an audio introduction to the book. Thank you again for visiting the channel.